The European View Podcast. Your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal, brought to you by the Martens Centre. With Sara Pini.
Hello and welcome to the European View Podcast, your new way to navigate through the main issues of our policy journal with valuable insights from the authors themselves. I'm Sara Pini, Senior Research Officer at the Martens Centre, and today we will discuss about the future of enlargement with my colleague, Teona Lavrelashvili, who recently joined the Martens Centre as a visiting fellow. So welcome, Teona, both to the podcast and to the Martens Centre, actually.
Thank you, Sara. Thanks for having me.
So, in the latest issue of the European View, you wrote an article titled How to Make EU Enlargement Work, a Grassroots Approach to Strategic Preparations. It's actually a very comprehensive overview of the different challenges that a future enlargement to potentially 10 new member states could pose for the EU. Which ones of these challenges do you think would be the most difficult to tackle?
Yes, indeed, there are a number of challenges accompanying to the potential of enlargement, but I would perhaps highlight two sets of challenges. First, it's the impact on the decision-making process within the Council, and the second, this budgetary constraints. When it comes to the decision-making process within the Council, as we know, the qualified majority voting is the common procedure, but each new member state is also bringing their own veto power. So here we have two sets of challenges. One, how we are going to ensure that enlargement will happen considering the current procedures, and the second, what to do with the new member states who will bring their own veto powers. Will this complicate further procedures within the Council? And the second one, I mentioned also budgetary constraints, especially the impact on common agriculture policy, on multi-financial framework, and on cohesion funds. And therefore, as you know, so the Committee of the Regions as well requested the special report and analysis to what extent the new enlargement countries, future members, will affect also the distribution of the finances in the regions.
Okay, so institutional and budgetary issue, but if I understood correctly from your article, your main message is that these issues are inherently political. And so purely institutional solution, purely institutional reform are not enough, right? And what you argue for is what you call a grassroots approach. Can you explain us a bit what you mean by that?
With the grassroots approach, I suggest that the European Union needs to manage the expectation. And in this respect, I highlight three principles. First, enhance the horizontal cooperation among EU institutions on enlargement issues. Second, increase and improve the operational efficiency of the enlargement methodology itself. And then finally, increasing the public engagement with EU enlargement. So as we see, there is decoupling when it comes to the political process and orienting the enlargement process towards grassroots approach, involving better the candidate countries in the decision-making process when it comes to the EU enlargement. But let me dive a bit further on these three main indicators that define, in my view, the grassroots approach. Horizontal cooperation is needed among EU institutions because we all also remember the famous dissonance when it comes to the potential date of EU accession. And therefore, I think that the external representation within the European Union need to be better defined and the roles need to be better assigned. Second, the enlargement methodology needs to be further upgraded, especially towards two directions. First, new methods need to be upgraded to make sure that the enlargement countries also respect rule of law. And once they are on the path of the EU accession, then the regression then won't be possible. So, and the second is the importance of the alignment on common foreign and security policy, which I believe is a new fundamental for EU accession process. And the EU in this respect is right. We need to have a closer and a very detailed attention to the progress and importance on alignment on the common and foreign security policy. And finally, the grassroots approach, in my view, also means enhanced engagement of public in enlargement process. This could also include direct dialogue with the citizens, but mainly improving the strategic communication methods to better explain the benefits of EU accession process in EU candidate countries, but also in EU member states.
Your article was published, of course, before the last European elections. How do you think that the new political landscape that emerged after 9 of June will affect the trajectory and the speed of the enlargement process?
I think that with the current results in the European Parliament, we can already argue that enlargement process will be affected. And as we know, European Parliament is not playing a major role when it comes to the European Union's enlargement. However, the discourses, debates, and of course, the internal deliberations influence the European Commission's progress reports, but also influence the European Council's decisions and their preferences when it comes to EU enlargement. And with the rise of the far right, even though we have not seen radical, let's say, shift and surge of the far right parties in the European Parliament, with the current composition, I would argue that there will be less enthusiasm for EU enlargement, also taking into account the current challenges, polycrisis within the European Union, but also economic decline. And this argument goes in line with the budgetary constraints that I mentioned and we discussed during our conversation, as we need to understand the real costs of EU enlargement. So I think that this kind of debates we will be hearing in the European Parliament very often.
Sure. Let's hope there will not be another enlargement fatigue that the events in Ukraine have kind of overcome, right?
This is possible, especially also when we look into the opinion polls and Eurobarometer also with some of the EU member states and with current situation in France. And that is why I think it's important to depoliticize to a certain extent the enlargement process and reorient to the grassroots approach to have operational and functional cooperation with the candidate countries.
That's a very good approach. But in this framework, will the EPP continue to be, as it has always been, I have no problem saying, the main driver behind the process?
Indeed, you are right, because historically the EPP has been always the main driver of EU integration and EU enlargement process, even though its party manifesto does not mention the concrete date of EU accession process. And I believe that this step is not only logical, but also very much rational, because it's never a good idea to speculate on the date of the EU accession. But with the more convincing results in the European Parliament, I believe that the EPP will stay the main driver of EU enlargement process and also will play a key role in mobilizing the support and coalition around the EU integration process in the European Parliament and beyond.
Speaking of the EPP, one of the recommendations that shape your grassroots approach, then the third part that you mentioned, is to leverage the untapped potential of European political parties. What role could these Euro parties play in this process?
European political parties have a great potential to play not only in enlargement process from Brussels' perspective, but also in transforming the national political systems and the sister parties that they are affiliated with in enlargement countries. And we need to also mention that the number of these parties are increasing day by day. That also means that the rapprochement of this political discourse and political context is becoming more and more relevant. Therefore, I believe that European political parties need to play a bigger role. And how? This is the question. First, they should use their contacts with the candidate countries to foster reforms at national level through their government parties and encourage also opposition partners, because as we know, European political parties, they have sister parties not only in the government but also in opposition. But this is not an obstacle to use their potential to transform national systems and to promote EU integration, because through the opposition parties they indeed can encourage them to play a constructive role in political process. Second, in the countries where polarization is very much high, and we know unfortunately the level of polarization in neighbored countries, enlargement countries are on the rise, not only in candidate countries but also in the EU. I think that European parties can play a role as a facilitator, mediator, in order to bring these parties together and to encourage them to build a consensus. And finally, I think that European political parties should also play their fair share to increase the visibility of the European Union and to communicate better, strategically and in a very clear way, the benefits of the EU accession process. As you know, Sarah, and Maastricht Treaty also gave the big task to the European political parties, that is raising awareness of EU integration. And I think that through these contacts in EU enlargement countries, Euro parties will indeed raise awareness of EU integration process.
And I think we should pay homage to our founder and late President Wilfried Martens, right? Because it's thanks to him that the EPP became this antechamber for accession for member parties, and so also for these candidate countries, right?
Indeed, by opening the doors to EU candidate countries, he showed a visionary approach.
Now, broadening a bit the question, because European parties are one of your key areas of expertise, one of your main interests. What future in general do you see for them?
Well, I think that European political parties as transnational federations have significant potential and responsibility in building and strengthening the EU political system. However, their visibility is minimal, and if you ask the ordinary citizen, they won't tell you about the European political parties. The future of these parties also depends, Sarah, on the evolution of the European Union itself. And with the rise of nationalist parties, there is still a long way, unfortunately, I have to say. There is a long way to go until the full institutionalization of the European political parties. However, achieving a fully functional European Union with strengthened democratic legitimacy and vibrant public sphere will not be possible without fully fledged European political parties.
I totally agree, of course. Thank you, Teona, for joining us and for this interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And for those listening in, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and discover all the interesting insight of the European view on our website, martencenter.eu, and on all our social media channels. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.
This was the European View podcast, your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal. Follow the Martens Centre for more.